How's it going, Reef Keepers? Hope you guys had a pretty great Christmas. I know that we did in our house. And I posted shortly before the holiday break there a video about this tank. This being the first clownfish anemone tank that I've ever undertaken. And had one person comment. Most people were, excited about the tank or whatnot. Did have one person comment saying how cruel it was to keep a pair of clownfish in a fluval Evo, which is a 13.5 gallon tank. So I kind of wanted to explain my thoughts behind keeping this particular pair of clownfish in a 13.5 gallon tank and just kind of expand on, fish of different sizes and different situations and different tanks and kind of how I see that. So the story behind these two little clownfish is that they are, I believe, and I'm going to get it wrong, somebody will correct me. I think they're called black storm clownfish. And the pair of them was like, at the time when I got them, which was 3 years ago, something like that, um, they were like $325 at one of the local fish stores in the city that I lived in. And they sat in a 5 gallon cube since the time they were very small. And I began seeing them at this fish store for like probably the better part of a year until they dropped the price on them and they were within range of me buying them basically. I think they dropped the price to, I can't remember, 250 or something for the pair just to move them because they'd been there like 6 or 7 months. So these fish only knew a 5 gallon cube for the first however many months of their life, 6 to 8 months for sure. And when I took them in, I put them in a 25 gallon tank. Now the 25 gallon tank that I put them in was already populated by several smaller fish. And these guys never really got along. There was a wrasse that didn't like them. There was a royal grama that didn't appreciate them. And they didn't, stress them to the point of their psychological breaking point or anything like that. But they did drive them into one corner of this 25 gallon tank. So even though they had plenty of space, there were a few other small fish in that tank that just kept them on the ropes, right? Fast forward to me moving. So, we moved to the new city that we moved to last year, in 2022. And I get an 80 gallon tank. And I'm like, oh, this will be great for these clownfish. So I put them in the 80 gallon tank. And it became quickly apparent that unfortunately, because these guys lived so much of the start of their life in a 5 gallon cube and then were, bullied on and off in a 25 gallon tank, they just never wanted to leave one corner of the 80 gallon tank. And the corner that they chose was actually like the rear corner behind the overflow box. So like if you know a peninsula style tank, how it's designed, the overflow box sticks out and there's a couple of recessed corners where you can basically hide power heads and stuff. Well, they were hiding basically all the time. So they would venture out occasionally, if they were getting hungrier than normal, or the other fish were at the other end, they might venture out. But basically they were just like, a pair of hermits living up in the corner in the darkness of this tank. So essentially, I was like, all right, I basically have two fish that are just taking up space who are intimidated for no reason at all because they're psychologically, what their experience to this point has psychologically affected them. I'm going to move them into this smaller tank and see how they do, just as an experiment. So I scooped them out, caught them pretty easily, put them in this tank, some months back, and they absolutely love just being alone, right? It's almost 3 times the size of the horrible little, 5 gallon cube they were in the fish store in the first place. And they don't have any other fish in here to bother them at all. And there are no plans to put any other fish in this tank. They are happy as could be. They just want to be together. They just want a slow flow, simple space. They don't even utilize the entirety of this tank. I don't think I've ever seen them over on this side of the tank at all. They just lurk up by the black wall, and that's what they do. They just want to do their thing together, and they both sleep together down in the sand. You can see their little nest down here, and this is their life, and they love it. Compared to being in the huge tank, they're infinitely more comfortable. So I think, people always make jokes about like the tank police and, people freaking out about fish and tank size. Generally, to kind of wax poetic for a second, what I think about fish and tank size is if you're putting, a hippo tang in a 25-gallon tank, you're doing something wrong, right? It doesn't matter if that hippo tang, it's a hippo tang. It doesn't matter if that hippo tang was in a 2-gallon tank as a baby for a year and an LFS. It is a hippo tang. There is a difference between a hippo tang and a standard clownfish, right? A hippo tang needs space. It needs to swim. It's gonna stress itself to the point that it dies otherwise. However, there are certain situations where a fish that's not like a particularly strong swimmer, not a distant swimmer, a fish that generally picks out an anemone and like lives within a 2-foot or 18-inch, basically a cube they draw for themselves, like a clownfish. These fish are thriving in a smaller, more private situation for them. They are absolutely thriving compared to being forced to be in a larger tank with social interactions that frankly petrified them and drove them into hiding at all times. So I think there are select circumstances depending on the fish. And maybe I'll make a longer video about, certain other species of fish that I think, people go a little too hard and there's too many, blanket applications of, oh, they need X amount of gallons, otherwise, you're a terrible person. I think there's a lot of situations where depending on the history of that fish or the temperament of that fish, or like, maybe the size of that fish, if it grew up in captivity and it never got very large, or it's, or it was captive bred in the first place and it's always been, hemmed in, and some of that, you're not like taking it straight out of nature and robbing it of the whole ocean kind of thing. There are certain, and again, it can't be to a point where it's egregious and it's, cruel. But I think there are a lot of nuanced circumstances, especially after people get to know their fish, where it's like, you know what, this fish is okay in this situation. Ultimately, at the end of the day, like, there is some arbitrary way that you look at this, like in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of a moot point. We're taking all fish out of the expanse of the ocean, basically unlimited vastness, and putting them into tanks. Okay, even if you take a hippo tank and put it in a 1,000-gallon tank, you're still taking it out of the reef that is an unlimited space for it, and you're putting it into a 1,000-gallon tank. It's gonna know it's still in a tank. It's still gonna feel limitations. Is it gonna be healthy? Yeah, because it's 1,000 gallons, but it's still gonna know that it's in a tank. It's still gonna understand that it's not free. So I think a lot of times people screaming about, fish should be in this size tank and up, and that's it. That's the hard rule, period, end of story. I think a lot of that is like justification to make yourself feel better at the end of the day. Like, at the end of the day, they are still all prisoners. They're prisoners in it's selfish what we do. Like, we just have to face that. Like, we're not giving them a better life. You can take care of them and have great husbandry. They can be totally healthy. They might live longer in captivity than they did out on the reef because they're not going to get eaten or whatnot. At the end of the day, we're still taking creatures out of the ocean and putting them into glass boxes, and it is for our own pleasure and gain. And you just have to accept that at some point, right? That's why I like to go with captive bred fish, because they never know the world they're being robbed of, right? And I think that is a significantly better situation, like morally. Like that fish never knew the vastness of the reef out in the Great Barrier Reef, or the coast of Indonesia or whatever. It didn't, or Hawaii. It didn't know that, so it's a little better, but it's still like a fish that's meant to be swimming in vast expanses that you're putting into a glass box. So at some point, it's like you have to accept all of it's wrong on some level, but if in accepting that it's wrong, you also accept that you have to take the best care of these creatures as you possibly can. And there are going to be certain situations where fish that, like, the recommended tank size, it may not work out, simply because something's happened to the fish where it's going to prefer a different environment. Like these clownfish, they just prefer privacy. They prefer to be in an enclosed, more private, tank of their own. And they thrive in this environment rather than a vastly larger environment where they have to be terrified of other fish all day. So anyway, weird subject, tough subject to talk about, but I figured I would try to address it, since somebody was pretty offended by the fact that I put these guys in here. But yeah, this is, trust me, the happiest I've seen these two fish in any setup that I have put them in. I've had them in, like I mentioned, several different setups throughout their life. So anyway, they're doing all right. Anemone's doing, I think, fine. I don't know much about anemones, but it looks good. I've been feeding it pellets, carnivore pellets. It seems to like those. Slowly ramping the light up, so the light's getting stronger day by day. And then I have a Ceche 0.5 synchro silent, quote unquote silent return pump in here. It's not silent. I can hear that thing buzzing like a little buzzsaw in there all day. I don't like those pumps, actually. I'm not a big Ceche fan. I think that none of their pumps are especially quiet, and I think that they also ramp up and down in speed a little bit on their own. So I'm changing it out for a DC pump, and I'll do a review on that when it comes in. It's an AliExpress special, but I think it'll be much better and much quieter than what we got in here now. It's more powerful too, so... Anyhow, all right, guys. Thanks for listening to me ramble for 13 whole minutes if you've stuck with it this long. And I'm going to get back to posting videos more regularly now that the holidays are out. So stick around and like and subscribe if you want to follow. Thanks.